Hello, I'm Charlotte Brow, Director of the Foundation's Arts and Humanities Program. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our third Arts and Humanities Fall Lecture in the Fall Series. Now, next Monday, we want you to come back because we will have our own Jeff Holtz is going to interview Jim Blackburn, who was the prosecutor of the Jeffrey McDonald case. And he will talk about, as he interviews Jim, they will talk about not only the case, but also as his career went on, his fall from grace, and how he was able to redeem himself. It's going to be a wonderful interview, and we hope you can come for that. I do want to take this opportunity to ask you to check your cell phones, and please make sure they're silent. As a matter of fact, I need to go back and do mine before when I get back to my seat. However, this evening, we are very fortunate to have Dr. Roy Heidicker, we all call him Doc. His lecture tonight is The Battle of Agincourt, and he's going to add a Shakespearean twist. So this should be very, very interesting. This is part of the Great Battles in History series, and he's already done Waterloo, the Battle of Cannae, and so we're looking forward to another one in the future. You might let us know what that will be later. But Doc Heidicker became the 4th Fighter Wing historian in June of 2005 and retired, was it 3 years now? He was responsible for writing the periodic histories and delivering historical information as needed to the wing and the community. During his career there, he and the 4th Fighter Wing Public Affairs Office created a feature-length documentary film called The History of the 4th Fighter Wing. He continues to work with his wife, Judine, in their internet, there she is as she comes in their internet-based company, Classic Aviation and War Art. So you have to check with him afterwards about that. It is one of the largest aviation art dealerships in the world with worldwide sales. Now, see, Doc has been here a number of times, not just for this series, but he also helped organize the 4-year series of lectures celebrating the 150th anniversary of the Civil War. He also returned to present and commemorate the 75th anniversary of World War II. Doc Heidicker was born in New York, attended West Point for 2 years, and completed his undergraduate degree at Marquette University. He was an officer in the Marine Corps through the Naval ROTC. After his military service, much of his career was at the University of Southern California in various roles. While there, he obtained a master's degree and PhD in military history. Thus, he's Doc, right? So let's give Doc a warm welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming this evening. And we're not just going to talk about the Battle of Agincourt, one of the most fascinating battles in the history of battles, but this guy called William Shakespeare wrote a play called Henry V that was essentially about this battle. And part of what I want to talk about is how we see this battle based on Shakespeare's play. And I also want to talk about how when people take actual military history and turn it into entertainment, because Shakespeare was basically an entertainer, what happens? What happens to that history, and what happens to how we remember it. So thank you, sit back, enjoy, and the Battle of Agincourt. First of all, let's put this into historical context. The battle was part of the 100 Years' War between England and France. Now, England was the aggressor in this war because England had territory in France and was trying to expand that territory essentially so the King of England would also be the King of France. Now, the French would conduct naval raids against the English and burn, pillage some towns, but there was no real attempt by the French to conquer England. Now, Henry V's purpose was to increase his holdings in France, specifically the Duchy of Normandy, and again, ultimately become the king of both countries. Now, Shakespeare's play was written in 1599, so that's almost 200 years after the Battle of Agincourt took place. Now, prior to writing Henry V, Shakespeare wrote Richard II, Henry IV Part 1, and Henry IV Part 2. Henry IV was Henry V's dad. Contemporary audiences would have known Henry V from those plays, but in those plays, he was a wild and undisciplined young man. Now, as we'll see in Henry V and in the actual battle, he is a disciplined and formidable military leader by this moment in his life. Now, we have to keep in mind, Shakespeare didn't write Henry V to increase our knowledge of military history in the Battle of Agincourt in particular. He wrote it to entertain an audience. And the more entertaining it was, the more people are going to buy tickets and show up. So we have to keep that in mind. The opposing kings, Charles VI of France. Charles became King of France in 1380 when he was 11 years old, not all that uncommon back then. At that time, France was in good shape militarily, but unfortunately, Charles VI suffered from mental illness. He would periodically sustain attacks of delirium. Lack of leadership at the top caused instability throughout France. Two groups of nobles, the Burgundians and the Armagnacs, vied for power. Now at Agincourt, there were two potential leaders. Charles d'Albret, he was the constable, and Marshal Jean Le Mangre. Had either of them really been in charge, it's probable that the French would have won the battle. But for the French, at Agincourt, nobody was really in charge, so there was no real coherent leadership. Henry V, that's the best looking actor playing Henry V that I could find, so I thought, yeah, let's use that one. I thought that was pretty cool. Henry V, oops, what did I do? There we go. Henry V becomes the King of England in 1413 when he was 27 years old. Now, prior to becoming the king, he waged war against Scotland and Wales. So he had a history of military leadership, made him a determined and ruthless warrior and a powerful and successful king. There are numerous instances of his cruelty, including, as we'll see, a key decision in the Battle of Agincourt. Now, Agincourt was part of a campaign. The purpose of the campaign was to regain Normandy. It was a well thought out, meticulously planned campaign. Now, unlike Charles VI, in Henry, we have a king who is very skilled in the art of war. Now, I found these great maps, and oftentimes what the maps say and what I say are different, especially when it talks about the numbers of combatants. So take what I say over what I show you, okay? But the maps are very good, so I had to use them. Now, the importance of topography. The green represents woods. The battle took place between the woods. The battlefield was very small. You could literally fit dozens of Agincourt battlefields into the battlefield of Waterloo. In fact, I'll go back to it so you can look at it as I'm speaking. Bracketed by woods, severely limited the abilities to maneuver the armies. The conflict would take place here, between them. Now, this was farmland, so it had recently been plowed and planted with wheat. It had been raining a lot, including the night before, so the ground was a soft and slippery mess. Now, men in armor and horses would have a particularly hard time remaining upright in the muck. This was a key to the Battle of Agincourt. Now, let's talk about the opposing sides. And again, don't worry about the numbers that they show you there. The number of British troops, we know more about the British than the French in this battle, was significantly less than 10,000 men. There were about 5,000 archers and 900 men-at-arms. Men-at-arms were your basic knights in shining armor, both mounted and dismounted. At this stage of the campaign, Henry's army was exhausted, hungry, many of them were sick. They were a small and bedraggled army. Now, in the play, Henry's men lament that they were facing odds of 5-1. Entirely possible. Accurate numbers for the French were not kept. They had at least 30,000, but possibly more. Easily could have had 5 times what the British had. Also, the French army was fresh, well-fed, healthy, and eager to fight. Most of the French were mounted and dismounted men-at-arms. They had 2,000 archers, but most of their archers were crossbowmen, and that's going to make a difference. Now, this, to the best of our knowledge, was the gist of the actual address that Henry gave to his troops prior to the battle. I exhort you to act well. I have come into France to recover my lawful inheritance, and I have a good and just cause to claim it. In this quarrel you must freely and surely fight. Remember, you were born in the kingdom of England, where mothers, wives, and children now dwell. Therefore you ought to strive to return there with great glory and fame. The kings of England, my predecessors, had gained many noble battles and successes over the French. On this day, you must endeavor to preserve your own person and honor of the crown of the King of England. So why does he want them to fight? So he can increase his power. Oh, and by the way, you're fighting for your families also, and we'd like you to stay alive, is in essence what he's telling his troops. Now, the archers, the English archers, are crucial in this battle. Again, this is more of what Henry's telling the troops. It is my duty to remind you that the French boasted that they would cut off 3 fingers from the right hand of every archer they might take, so that their shot should never again kill man or horse. These 3 fingers. Try shooting a bow without these 3 fingers. Can't do it. The French would actually taunt the archers before the battle by holding up these 3 fingers. We get our hands on you, you're not going to have these fingers anymore. So, of anybody on the field, the English archers really had motivation to win this battle. Now, I'm going to read in its entirety Shakespeare's Band of Brothers speech from Henry V. Interspersing that with images, this is Laurence Olivier, who made Henry V during World War II, and we're going to talk about that also. But good-looking guy, beautiful photography, so I thought, why not? Let's intersperse this. So this is Laurence Olivier as Henry V. It starts out with Henry, they called him Harry, hearing his men, including his leaders, talking about the upcoming battle. This is what they say. Of fighting men, they have full 70,000. That's 60,000 men. There's 5-1. Besides, they are all fresh. Those are fearful odds, Oh, that we now had here but 1/10,000 of those in England that do no work today. We're in trouble, guys. They outnumber us 5-1, and they're fresh. And I wish people who are back in England not doing a whole lot of anything were here to help. Harry rides up and says, "What's he that wishes so? My cousin Westmoreland? No, my fair cousin. If we are marked to die, we are enough to do our country loss. And if to live, the fewer men, the greater share of honor. God's will, I pray thee, wish not one man more." Henry's saying, I don't want anybody else. If we're going to lose, well, okay. We lose, and there's enough of us here to lose. More of Laurence Olivier. Now, Henry continues, and I'm going to skip 6 lines, because in the lines he basically says, I do not desire gold, I desire honor. But he says it using all kinds of words. Then he says, no, faith, my coz, wish not a man from England God's peace, I would not lose so great an honor. In other words, if we had more people, not as much honor. As one man more, methinks, would share from me for the best hope I have, I do not wish one more. More soldiers, less honor for us. Essentially what Henry is saying. And Laurence again. Henry continues, rather proclaim it presently through my host, that he which hath no stomach for this fight, let him depart. Any English soldiers not want to fight? See ya. His passport shall be made, and crowns for convoy put into his purse. You need money to go away? Yeah, we'll help you. We would not die in that man's company that fears his fellowship to die with us. This day is called the Feast of Crispian. Crispin and Crispian were 2 Christian martyrs, so that's why we have St. Crispin's Day. But Henry is basically saying, if you don't want to fight, you don't have to be here. More glory for us. He continues, he that outlives this day and comes safe home will stand a tiptoe when this day is named, and rouse him at the name of Crispian. This is in the future. He that shall see this day and live to old age will yearly on the vigil feast his neighbors, and say, tomorrow is St. Crispian. Then he will strip his sleeve and show his scars, and say, these wounds I had on Crispian's day. So every year for the rest of my life, I'll invite the neighbors and we'll celebrate what an incredible hero I am. Now we're getting more into the heart. And again, this is Shakespeare writing one of the most motivational speech in the history of the world. Old men forget, yet all shall be forgot. But he'll remember with advantages what feats he did that day, the day of the battle. Then shall our names, familiar in his mouth as household words, Harry the King, Bedford and Exeter, Warwick and Talbot, Salisbury and Gloucester, be in their flowing cups freshly remembered. This story shall the good man teach his son, and Crispin Crispian shall ne'er go by from this day to the ending of the world, but we in it shall be remembered. We'll be immortal. It's kind of like Achilles and the Trojan War. Achilles' mom told him before he went off to war, if you go to war, you're going to die. But you'll be remembered for all time as a great hero. So he went to war, wanted to be the hero. And now this is the essence of this speech. We few, we happy few, we band of brothers, for he today that sheds his blood with me shall be my brother. Be he ne'er so vile, this day shall gentle his condition, and gentlemen in England now abed shall think themselves accursed that they were not here, and hold their manhoods cheap, whiles any speaks that fought with us upon St. Crispin's Day. In other words, we are, not only do we not want to leave, we're happy to be here. All else will wish they were here. Remember, this is Shakespeare's words. This is not what Harry actually said. But this is the essence of the Band of Brothers speech. Now, before we get into the battle, I have to talk about these guys because they are really, really important. Many of the soldiers fighting at Agincourt were mounted and dismounted men of arms, like I said, knights in shining armor. These were literally your knights in shining armor. Heavily armored, they fought largely with swords and lances. The French had archers, but they were mostly crossbowmen, a weapon very difficult to reload, maybe 2 shots a minute, and they didn't have many bolts. Bolts, same thing as arrows, available. Many were mounted, and most wore some armor. Now, the English archers used the longbow. They played a pivotal role in the battle. They carried about 48 arrows, and they could fire 12 arrows a minute. They wore little armor, normally only a helmet called a bassinet that gave them complete vision. Their faces weren't covered. They were highly mobile. They carried small swords, axes, and heavy mallets because they hammered stakes into the ground in front of them to protect themselves from cavalry. Now, this is the French up here. Actually, should be a lot more blue than that, including a pretty big third line. Got your forests, got your English. Now, these are your men-at-arms, these big blocks. These are your archers. And again, a lot of current historians say the archers were only on the flanks. They weren't interspersed. They were just on the flanks. Now, both sides want the other to attack. The French army knew the English had to get to the coast, and the only way they were going to get to the coast was to go through them. The French are well supplied, had a significantly larger army. They're content to wait the English out. Henry and his weakened army had to get to the coast, so Henry had to figure out a way to make the French army attack him. At this point, the armies are about 1,000 yards apart. Now, what Henry does is he moves his forces close enough that the archers start unleashing volleys of arrows at the French. Well, the French aren't happy about that. So they send, it should be a pretty large cavalry charge, but because of lack of French leadership, not that big. First, they try to dislodge the archers, and they can't because the archers have planted stakes in front of them. So they charge the center of the English line, but it's an uncoordinated attack, and it has only a portion of the French forces available. Now, this is showing them actually making contact. The initial French charge encounters the plowed and soggy field. Men and horses are thrown into chaos. Horses stumble, and the men-at-arms are so burdened by their armor, they're thrown helpless into the mud. The 2 leaders I talked about, the constable and the marshal, they're in this first attack. Constable's killed, marshal's captured. So the potential leadership of the French, that's gone right off the bat. Now, some of the French riders see what's happening, and they try to go back. Well, what happens there? The retreating men and horses help throw the oncoming French into confusion. So the leaderless French army encounters the initial phase of catastrophe. Looks pretty fabulous, but it turns into something not quite so. Oncoming lines of French men-at-arms try to move forward despite waves of arrows hitting them and their horses. The quagmire, that is the battlefield, becomes worse as more French try to force their way forward. Now, the other thing you need to understand is the French, they know they're going to win, and they're probably going to win pretty quickly, so they all want glory. They all want to get a share of this glorious battle. So they just plunge in. Seeing the mass of Frenchmen struggling and helpless in the mud, the English archers, which are the bulk of Henry's army, throw down their bows and charge into the fray. And remember, they have no armor, just a helmet. They've got swords, axes, and mallets. They attack the helpless French they can't even stand up in the mud. They attack them, and the slaughter begins. A lot of the French try to surrender, but in the confusion, they're killed. So the least respected members of the English army are doing the most damage. Again, showing the basic battle at this point. And again, this is confusion. Now, most of the attack forces towards the back, they don't show them here. They're retreating because they can see this mess in front of them. In the chaos of battle, many of the French are crushed in the mingling of mud, horses, and bodies. Some of the French, like I said, they try to surrender, but they're killed in the confusion. The English want to take prisoners because in these days, if you captured a French noble, you could ransom him for huge amounts of money. Now, during the battle, show the French broken, trying to get away. Now, during the battle, the French manage, and they're not even sure exactly how, but they manage to get, this is the British camp. They manage to get around and into the British camp. So they kill the people that are there, they steal whatever they can get their hands on, and Henry believes, oh my gosh, I've got French behind me, we've got hundreds, possibly thousands of French prisoners, and we still have, even though they're kind of a confused mass at this point, they still dramatically outnumber the English. So he thinks he's surrounded, or, he's got French on both sides. Believing that, he orders the French prisoners to be killed. Again, talking about a Henry who's a great military leader, but also cruel when he needs to be. Well, who gets to kill the English prisoners? English archers. As always, 200 of them are assigned to kill the prisoners. Now, it's believed that when Henry realized that things were stabilizing and the prisoners were no longer a threat, he called that order off. So not all the French prisoners were killed. But this is essentially the end of the battle. And it doesn't take long. Those of you who heard my Waterloo lecture, that was all day. This is the smallest amount of time I've read was a half hour, possibly a couple of hours, but certainly no more than that. Now, the immediate results of the battle, Henry V and the English win a resounding victory. Like the Battle of Cannae, the disparity in casualties is almost difficult to believe. It's like, how is that even possible? Some estimates say the French lost over 10,000 men. The English lost approximately 600. That's insane. And this isn't the days of shooting missiles and torpedoes. This is, except for the shooting arrows, this is up close and personal. So the way is open to the coast. The English march to the coast, embark, and return to England. Now, what are the long-term results of this campaign? Among the 10,000 that the French lost were 600 knights and nobles killed, and many more captured. This is a huge blow to the leadership class of France, especially with a king suffering mental illness who's not really in charge. Now, after this battle, later campaigns on land and sea net Henry Normandy and huge portions of France, including Paris. So he's essentially achieving his goals. Henry marries Catherine, the daughter of King Charles V, in 1420, and becomes heir to the French throne. Now, Henry dies of disease, they think dysentery, in 1422. Charles VI dies only 7 weeks later. Henry and Catherine's one-year-old son, Henry VI, inherits the throne of England and France, but during his reign, Henry VI loses the French territory and the French throne. So Henry V is spectacularly successful, but it's not something that really lasts. Isn't that a great image? So why did the English win and why did the French lose? Supposed to be the other way around. Well, first was organized English leadership. English army had a single leader in Henry V. His experience in previous battles paid dividends at Agincourt. By forcing the French to attack him, Henry was able to funnel them into the battlefield quagmire. Henry used his archers to supreme advantage. They goaded the French to attack, and then their mobility and courage turned the tide of battle. Also, like Alexander the Great and Hannibal, Henry fought front and center in the English line. Charles VI isn't even there. Henry's not only there, he's in the thick of battle. Nothing motivates soldiers more, than having their commander right next to them, fighting alongside of them. The English archers, I've talked about them. They determined the course of battle. Goaded the French to attack, then the series of events would lead to the huge French army being crushed in the mud. When they were trapped in the quagmire, it was the nimble and determined archers who destroyed them. Their role was absolutely decisive. And topography, weather, mud. In the Middle Ages, a trained soldier on horse or on foot in heavy armor was a formidable opponent. But because the battlefield was such a quagmire, that worked completely against them. Trying to walk through this slippery, soggy mud played a major role in the French defeat. Plus, they had to contend with the hail of English arrows and a muddy battlefield that first hindered their advance and then rendered them helpless. Without the mud, again, we're not talking about an English victory, we're probably talking about a French victory. Now, how is this battle and Henry V remembered since then? Like I mentioned before, Laurence Olivier produced, directed, and starred in the Shakespeare play Henry V in World War II. Olivier and Churchill knew each other. They were good friends. Churchill and the government eagerly endorsed Olivier's making the film in 1944. This is towards the end of the war. The film motivated the British people to continue fighting a long and bloody war. Now, Churchill was a great writer. This is what Churchill wrote about King Henry. A gleam of splendor in the dark. A gleam of splendor in the dark. I won't do that to you. Troubled story of medieval England. He came to the throne in a moment when England was wearied of feuds of brawl and yearned for unity and fame. He went on to say, Henry led the nation away from internal discord to foreign conquest. He had the dream and perhaps the prospect of leading all Western Europe into the high championship of a crusade. So, Churchill, Henry V, big fan, big time. Now, what are some of the modern uses of the Band of Brothers speech? Now, if you saw the movie 1994 Renaissance Man, it's about young people trying to become soldiers, and there's a part of the movie in which they're training in this horrible torrential downpour, and the drill instructor asks one of the troops, who he knows is a bright young man, to, you know, what do you know about this stuff? And the young man recites the entire Band of Brothers speech from memory, and it inspires all of them. Now, the 1996 film, Independence Day, World versus Space Invaders. This speech is given by the President of the United States before going into battle against aliens. Remember, the President is also a fighter pilot, you know, pretty cool. And should we win the day, the 4th of July will no longer be known as an American holiday, but as the day when the world declared in one voice, we will not go quietly into the night, we will not vanish without a fight, we're going to live on, we're going to survive. Today, we celebrate our Independence Day, like how St. Crispin's Day took on new meaning. In that film, Independence Day would become a world holiday. Now, I found this, just again, cruising through the internet. LinkedIn, there was an article by a guy called Gus Bessalel titled, After Layoffs, Will You Stand by Your Band of Brothers and Sisters? The article uses the Band of Brothers speech to help people navigate through downsizing and layoffs, and this is word for word what he said. Fortunately, most career decisions are not life and death, like the choice facing Henry V and his army at Agincourt. But maintaining your commitment to your company and your colleagues when they need you the most can yield positive benefits in terms of your career, your professional relationships, and your personal growth. My wife and I were watching a show on Netflix, I think, called Virgin River. And there was a part of that episode in which the main characters had just gone through this tragic episode, but they had survived. And this man, the protagonist, looks at his girlfriend and he says, we few, we happy few. And Judine and I kind of looked at each other like, yeah, we know what that's from. We know what they're trying to say. Pops up all the time. Now, the biggest modern use of the Band of Brothers speech from Henry V was the HBO series Band of Brothers. Takes its title and its main theme from Shakespeare's speech. The men of Easy Company were ordinary people before the war, workers and kids, just out of high school. As World War II paratroopers in the elite 101st Airborne Division, they fought a fierce enemy in the German Wehrmacht. The paratroopers' courage and determination to survive and overcome great odds was boosted by their camaraderie, their awareness of being a band of brothers. From D-Day, Market Garden, the Battle of the Bulge, and their march into Germany, they were sustained and motivated by their ability to count on their comrades, their band of brothers. These brothers fought and bled together, and they won World War II. One of the things they talked about in the series was leadership. This is Dick Winters, Major Dick Winters was the main character in the Band of Brothers series. His words, "If you're a leader, you lead the way. Not just on the easy ones, you take the tough ones too." He could have been talking about Henry V at Agincourt. Also the theme of brotherhood. One of the main characters in the series was Private William J. Wild Bill Gornair. Wild Bill said, "It doesn't matter where we go. Once we get into combat, the only person you can trust is yourself and the fella next to you, the brother next to you." Just an image of the guys, that's Dick Winters in the center, getting ready for D-Day, getting ready to jump out of airplanes behind enemy lines. What could possibly be more fun? And this is them at the end of the war, those who are left celebrating victory and the end of combat for them. Now, towards the end of the series, a German general contacted the closest American group, which was Easy Company, and said, "I want to surrender my command. Would you send an officer to accept my surrender?" And they did. And when they did, he asked for permission to address his troops one final time. And he was granted permission. So while the general spoke, Major Winters and his colleagues were very much moved by the words, because as you'll hear, what the German was saying, the German general was saying to his German troops, was very similar to what Major Winters had experienced with his men over the course of the war. This is the German general's words. That's him. Men, it's been a long war. It's been a tough, would you rather I do this in German? No? Okay. It's been a tough war. You fought bravely, proudly for your country. You're a special group. You found in one another a bond that exists only in combat among brothers. You've shared foxholes, held each other in dire moments. You've seen death and suffered together. I'm proud to have served with each and every one of you. You all deserve long and happy lives in peace." In conclusion, heading towards the end here, there is something in the human animal that is inspired, motivated, and moved by great stories. The Battle of Agincourt, a small bedraggled army slaughtering a mighty host, is in and of itself a great story. Henry V was a great hero. He was the architect of the victory and fought right alongside his men. Henry did talk to his men prior to the battle, but he did not recite the Band of Brothers speech. That was created by an awesome playwright, William Shakespeare, almost 200 years after the battle. But the created words from that play made the actual historical events of the battle a better story. What was an inherently dramatic event was made even more so by William Shakespeare, an author and, let's face it, an entertainer. Henry V was one of England's greatest kings and military leaders. The Battle of Agincourt was a significant victory that changed, at least for a generation, the course of human events. But without the Shakespeare play, particularly the Band of Brothers speech, would the historical person and events have the same hold on popular culture outside of England? I think not. The Stephen Ambrose book and subsequent HBO series Band of Brothers used the Shakespeare speech as the theme of both. Today, anytime individuals band together in brotherhood, like the LinkedIn thing talking about people, companies being downsized, or Virgin River, characters in a fictional drama getting through tough times, can refer to that speech because they're experiencing something similar. Now, I wanted to talk about, having talked about Henry V, Agincourt, and Shakespeare, I wanted to talk about other historical people or events that have been popularized and made significantly more famous by projects written whose purpose was to entertain. And I'm just going to share a couple with you. 1952-1953, NBC Television broadcast a 26-part series about the U.S. Navy in World War II called Victory at Sea, using incredible footage from Navy videographers, stirring narration, and a majestic soundtrack. Richard Rodgers wrote the soundtrack. Beautiful, inspiring music. The series was highly successful. Decades later, it was still being broadcast. In this case, the documentary format presented a largely factual account. So it presented the naval history of World War II to the American audience, but it was done in such a way that it was pretty right on. It was pretty factual. They stayed close to what had actually happened. Now, in 1970, the movie Patton was released, starring George C. Scott, a highly successful but controversial general in World War II. The film greatly added to his legacy and fame. But Patton was not overall in charge. Despite Eisenhower, Marshall, and MacArthur, Patton may be America's most famous World War II general because of the film. Was the film accurate? I think so. I think it was highly accurate. But if you asked the average American to tell you about Patton, of course they'd have to be over 50, they might remember the film and they could tell you a little bit. If you ask them about Eisenhower, maybe not. Marshall, probably not. How can you not accept an Academy Award? I'll never understand that one. In 1993, and I'll go, there we go. 1993, the film Gettysburg was released. The film was based on the 1974 historical fiction, underline, novel, The Killer Angels, by author Michael Shara. It was a highly dramatized version of one of the pivotal battles of the Civil War. Many Americans, in particular, had heard of Gettysburg, but the film gave them insight into the battle and its primary participants. Actual history was made more accessible by an account based on historical fiction. Now, I wrote my dissertation on the Civil War and spent a lot of time studying Gettysburg. I could tell you all kinds of inaccuracies, but I am glad they made that movie. A great movie, and I think it was close enough to the truth and so well done that it taught people lots of good stuff about a pivotal event in American history. Now, let's kind of go the opposite direction. 1995, the film Braveheart. And I love that movie. I've seen it a gazillion times, starring Mel Gibson. The film was about the legendary Scottish hero William Wallace. Much of the film was complete fiction, but it gave an obscure historical figure fame and renewed interest by a modern audience. His whole relationship with the princess who would become the Queen of England, no, never happened. Made for a great movie, never happened. One of the battles that was portrayed was the Battle of Stirling. Now, the Battle of Stirling is often referred to as the Battle of Stirling Bridge. There's no bridge in the movie, so you kind of saw a battle and lots of people getting killed and exciting, entertaining stuff, but didn't take place that way. So that's an example of how actual history can be distorted when it turns into entertainment. So not always a great thing. So that's my story. Any questions?
Doc, we want to thank you once again for your insight. Interesting. We do have some questions, if you don't mind. Dave Metter.
Dr. Heidicker, the French were not stupid. Would you care to speculate why they didn't take over for their own use, their own version of the English longbow, and instead fiddled around with those little crossbows?
Great question, and I can't even pretend to know the answer to that. Because again, it just seems logical that they would see it in action and go, yeah, we need to be doing this instead of doing that. I don't know, but how different would history have been if the French had adopted the longbow in large numbers? I think it would have changed things dramatically.
And the number of missiles that they could put in there, the penetration of those arrows over the...
Absolutely.
If all those French archers in the back had longbows, the muddy field wouldn't have made that much difference.
Not enough of them and weren't deployed properly, you know? Again, leadership is so essential in military history. Without Henry V, English don't win this battle. Without Hannibal, Cannae doesn't take place. Without Wellington, Waterloo probably goes the other way. So, essential. Sir?
Sir, Dr. Heidicker, do you know what the distance difference would be between the crossbow and the longbow? About what kind of distance?
Similar range. I think the bolts that they used in the crossbow were harder to make, so they traditionally didn't carry as many of them as they could have. But the key was it took so much longer to reload the crossbow than it did. I mean, with the longbow, shoot, grab another arrow, shoot. Whereas with the crossbow, shoot, and then you have to have a separate device to pull the line back, and difficult to make, difficult to reload, difficult to make the bolts. So, again, you know, why didn't they give up on that and go directly to the longbow? I think defense contractors and crooked senators had something to do with that, but that's just me.
Someone else with a question. Looks like all hearts and minds are clear. Nothing else?
Now, let me ask you a question. Can anyone think of another, could be a movie, could be a play, could be a television series, that displays history that's either a really good example of what actually happened and they do a really good job, or a really bad example? And let me throw one out at you. If any of you had seen my Bridge Too Far lecture about Operation Market Garden in World War II. The movie, A Bridge Too Far, was, to my mind, the best, most accurate depiction of history that's ever been done. Just extraordinary how right on that was. Can anybody think of an example of something else that's either really good or really bad? Yes, ma'am.
I need you to make the opinion, but what about Bridge Over the River Kwai?
Based on actual events, because the Japanese had lots of British prisoners that they used to do things like build roads and clear jungles and build bridges. But to my understanding, that's a fictional account. So, and plus, think about it. They had to have an American who escaped from the camp to go back and lead this desperate group of crazy British guys to go and blow up the bridge. Don't think that ever happened. So that's a great example. How many people saw that movie and thought that actually took place? You know? Oh, and let me throw another one out at you. The Great Escape. If any of you had seen that. Again, based on an actual event, there was a mass escape, and they recaptured almost everybody, and the Germans executed 50 of the people who had escaped. In my time as the 4th Fighter Wing historian, one of those was one of our guys. So I was able to find out even more about it. But the whole Steve McQueen character and what he did probably played a little fast and loose with the truth, but the overall concept was good, and they made a highly entertaining movie in the process.
This is my guess here, Tora, as a good example
Yes.
of portraying history
Yes.
correctly. And then The Patriot, another Mel Gibson film.
Oh, yeah.
Stretching, historical fiction, except for,
Oh, exactly. Exactly.
so those are my two.
Well, and think about this for a moment. The two movies, because as Americans, despite the fact that had we lost the Revolutionary War, they would have executed all of the founding fathers, we think the British people are just the best, greatest, fabulous people in the history of the world. Well, the two movies that are the most anti-English movies is The Patriot and Braveheart, because the English are horrifying in those, cruel and savage, and oh, it's unbelievable how bad they are. Murdering children and burning people alive and the whole shebang. So again, did they do that? Sure did. Who's the best person in the history of the world to share that with us? Mel Gibson. Not a historian. Thank you, Mel. Good job.
Doc, we have a question over here. I believe, Tommy, you wanted to ask a question?
Regarding the Great Escape, somewhere I read or saw that all of those things that those guys did were actually things that were perhaps done by different people in different places, and then they consolidated them and attributed to the particular ones that were housed in that particular prison.
Sure.
So that it's got some truth to it, but it's got a lot of
That
fiction.
makes perfect sense. I don't know if I'm gonna mess up the guys who are covering us here, but I have to share this true story with you. 2 Americans escaped from a German POW camp, and they had to make their way across Europe to get to freedom. How did they do it? Well, they got their hands on a clipboard and a pen and a measuring tape. And they would literally wander through town. One guy would measure stuff, and the other guy, oh, you better measure that. Oh. And that's how they got through Europe. Because who would suspect people that are working and are doing something that we have no clue what they're doing, but obviously it looks important because this one guy is measuring stuff very carefully, and the other guy is very meticulously writing it down. And they succeeded. They escaped.
It's a great story. Someone else before we close? One more question, maybe? Yes.
about Saving Private Ryan? The first
Excellent.
30 minutes of that, or
Excellent example.
the D-Day invasion.
Now, they mention at the beginning of the film the Sullivan brothers, because that was why they stopped sending every single brother into combat, especially in the same unit. Because the Sullivan brothers were 5 brothers who served on a ship in World War II. The ship was sunk, all 5 brothers were killed. So they kind of stopped doing that. The specific plot of, we have a guy who's parachuted behind the lines, and we just found out his brothers were killed. To my knowledge, that did not happen. And to my knowledge, we didn't send a small unit to try to find this person and return him safely home. However, the depiction of the initial assault on the beaches, my understanding is, from my research, my knowledge, that is the most factual depiction that's ever been done. Showing, I don't know if you remember, but you know, the landing craft, the door would open, and the German machine guns would literally kill every single person in the boat before they even could begin to leave. Very well done, very accurate, and a brutal but factual depiction of how horrifying it was and how we all need to think of our extraordinary World War II veterans the way the English can think about the people who fought on St. Crispian's Day at the Battle of Agincourt. You know, so many, we have to be so grateful to, well, not just World War II, all our veterans who served so incredibly and did such extraordinary things for us and our freedom. So, sir.
Do you have 3 relatively unknown books about the military of even back at the time of Agincourt that you might suggest, particularly the one about the measuring and the escape that was possible by measuring and reporting facts? Is there a book about that?
I don't know where I read that, so I couldn't tell you that, but as far as, there are 2 books on Agincourt. There's a British military history publishing company called Osprey, O-S-P-R-E-Y, that publishes a book about the Battle of Agincourt. That I used that book for a lot of my factual knowledge. There's also a book called The Face of Battle by John Keegan, K-E-E-G-A-N, who has a chapter, probably 50 pages, about what it was like for the guys in the ranks serving at the Battle of Agincourt. So those 2 books is what I would recommend.
What was the Keegan book name?
The Face of Battle. And that book helped change the study of military history, because he wasn't talking about generals, he was talking about the lowest of the low serving in the ranks and what it was like for them. When did they eat last? Were they sick? Were they tired? Were they hungry? And it was, he changed everything. Just a very important person when you talk about military history.
Doc, thank you very much. We all
Thank
enjoyed
you.
it. Let's give Doc another round of applause, please.
Thank you so much for coming. I am so grateful to have such a large and motivated audience, and I hope you enjoyed our lecture. But thank you so much for sharing this with us and for showing the interest. I very much appreciate it.
And thank you, Doc. Listen, good night. See you next week with Jeff Holtz and Jim Blackburn. Thank you, guys. Be safe.